I run a pharmaceutical consulting firm in Dusseldorf. Last March, an American executive flew in for partnership discussions. He'd been warned about German formality, which apparently translated in his mind to some elaborate ritual nobody else on earth practices. The man arrived at our office building, spotted me in the lobby, and immediately bowed at a 90-degree angle while extending both arms forward like he was presenting an invisible gift to royalty. He held this position for what felt like minutes. I stood there with my hand already extended for a normal handshake, watching him bent over, waiting for something. When he finally straightened up, he looked genuinely confused that I hadn't performed the same move. He said something about respecting traditional German greeting ceremonies he'd read about in a 14th century manuscript. I informed him we just shake hands here like everyone else. He responded that he'd specifically researched this and that German business culture required the double arm presentation bow to show respect for hierarchy. I'm still unclear what hierarchy he thought he was honoring. We shook hands. He seemed disappointed the entire meeting, like we'd somehow shortchanged him on the authentic German experience he'd prepared for. My cousin manages a luxury hotel in Vienna. An American couple checked in and seemed alarmed that the front desk staff only said, "Guten Tag," and shook their hands. The wife pulled her husband aside and whispered loudly that something was wrong because nobody had performed the triple greeting sequence. Her husband approached the desk again and asked if they were supposed to wait for the formal blessing portion. My cousin had no idea what he meant. The man explained that proper German-speaking formal greetings require 3 distinct phases: the verbal greeting, the handshake, and then a phrase about weather or harvest that signifies trust. He'd apparently learned this from a travel blog written by someone who'd never been to Europe. My cousin told them that actually we just say hello and shake hands. The woman insisted this was only because they were foreigners and that locals must do it differently. She spent her entire stay convinced the hotel was hiding the real greeting rituals from tourists. I work reception at a law firm in Hamburg. An American lawyer visiting for a contract signing walked past me, then backed up and asked why I hadn't greeted him properly. I'd said "Guten Tag" when he walked in. He said that didn't count because I hadn't made the formal announcement of his arrival status. Apparently he believed that in German professional settings, receptionists are required to verbally announce each person's role and purpose before handshakes are exchanged. He wanted me to say something like, "I announce the arrival of attorney James Morrison, here for legal consultation, may his business prosper." I told him we don't do that. He said it was definitely standard in German formal culture because his company's cultural training module included it. I asked where they got that information. He couldn't remember but insisted it was correct because the training had been expensive. He stood there waiting for me to announce him for another 30 seconds before giving up. The most efficient approach remains the traditional method we've used for decades. Walk up, shake hands firmly, say "Guten Tag," proceed with business. Nobody needs advanced preparation courses. My brother manages a conference center in Munich. An American tech CEO arrived for a summit and brought printed cards that listed his full name, title, company, educational credentials, and weirdly, his height and birth month. He handed these to every single person during the welcome reception, even the catering staff. When he got to the German Minister of Economics, he presented his card with both hands while bowing slightly and said he was honoring the German tradition of credential presentation hierarchy. The minister just took the card, glanced at it, and said thank you. The American looked crushed. He pulled my brother aside later and complained that none of the German attendees had performed the ceremonial card exchange ritual he'd prepared for. He'd apparently spent 2 weeks having special cards printed that included Latin phrases he believed were mandatory for German business culture. My brother explained we just hand people normal business cards if relevant. The man insisted my brother was wrong because he'd specifically paid a consultant $3,000 for German business protocol training. The consultant had told him that German professionals judge others entirely on credential presentation ceremonies. We looked at his card. One of the Latin phrases translated to bringer of harvests. He never quite understood why the German executives didn't take him seriously. I work at a private banking firm in Frankfurt. An American investor came for a portfolio meeting and arrived 15 minutes early, which actually is fine. But then he insisted on sitting in the waiting area practicing handshake angles with his assistant. He was measuring the precise degree of his wrist rotation and counting to 3 between each practice shake. When I called him in, he stood, took a deep breath, walked over with this intense focus, and grabbed my hand while saying, "Ich präsentiere mein Hand," which translates roughly to, "I present my hand." He explained that in German formal business culture, you must verbally announce the handshake before executing it to show respect for personal space boundaries. I told him we just shake hands normally. He said that couldn't be right because his company's Germany business training specifically taught the verbal announcement protocol. I asked who created that training. He said a guy named Derek who'd lived in Germany for 3 months during college. I suggested Derek might have misunderstood something. The investor insisted it was authentic because Derek had dated a German girl. He then spent the entire meeting announcing every gesture before doing it. Bevor wir sitting, ich sitze jetzt. Before opening his folder, ich öffne meinen Ordner. Before drinking water, ich trink Wasser. I've never experienced anything more exhausting. When I offered a normal goodbye, he performed a 15-second ritual involving eye contact timing that he said was mandatory for German formal departures. It wasn't. My sister works at an art gallery in Berlin. An American collector visited for a private viewing and showed up wearing a dark suit, white shirt, and a name badge he'd made himself that said, "Formal Viewing Guest, Art Appreciation Division." He'd apparently read that German formal cultural settings require participants to identify their role for record-keeping purposes. When my sister greeted him, he handed her a laminated card with his name, purpose of visit, and intended duration of stay. He said this was standard German gallery protocol to honor the formality of art spaces. My sister told him we don't do that. He seemed hurt and said he'd learned it from a documentary about European cultural norms that his book club had recommended. The documentary was apparently made in 1987 and focused on East German state functions, which explains nothing useful about modern art gallery visit. He insisted on wearing the name badge the entire time and kept asking if other visitors were also required to submit their roll cards but were just hiding them better than he was. Before leaving, he tried to sign a formal departure registry he assumed existed. It didn't. I work at a university in Heidelberg. An American professor arrived for a guest lecture and immediately asked where to submit his formal entrance petition. I had no idea what he meant. He pulled out a folder containing a typed letter addressed to the department chair, outlining his qualifications, reason for visiting, and expected duration of stay. He said that in German academic culture, visiting scholars must formally request permission to enter university buildings as a sign of respect for institutional hierarchy. I told him he could just walk in since we'd invited him. He said that couldn't be correct because he'd read about it in an academic cultural guide published by someone with a PhD. I asked if the person had ever been to Germany. He didn't know but insisted the protocol must be accurate because it was written in formal academic language. He spent 20 minutes looking for someone to accept his petition before eventually giving up and just going to the lecture hall. After his talk, he asked if anyone was going to provide the ceremonial academic handshake sequence where each person touches their right shoulder before extending their hand. Nobody knew what he was talking about. He left convinced German universities had abandoned tradition. My uncle owns a traditional restaurant in Stuttgart. An American couple came in for dinner and seemed upset that the hostess only said, "Guten Abend," and showed them to their table. The wife approached the hostess stand again and asked when the formal welcome service would begin. My uncle asked what she meant. She explained that German fine dining restaurants traditionally perform a table greeting ceremony where staff present a wooden token symbolizing hospitality and recite a short blessing about good food and friendship. My uncle told her we just bring menus and take orders. She insisted he was simplifying for foreigners and that German locals definitely experience the full ceremony. She'd read about it on a food blog written by someone who'd studied European dining culture extensively. The blog turned out to be a creative writing exercise. She waited at her table for 15 minutes, expecting someone to arrive with ceremonial items. When the waiter just brought bread, she asked if they were skipping the ritual because the restaurant was too busy. We weren't busy. She left a review online criticizing us for not honoring our own cultural traditions. The review included detailed descriptions of ceremonies we've never performed. I manage a cafe in Cologne. An American graduate student came in and started apologizing profusely before ordering. I asked what was wrong. He said he needed to apologize in advance for not performing the proper formal ordering sequence because he hadn't had time to practice. I told him to just tell me what he wanted. He said he'd learned that in German formal cafe culture, customers are expected to greet the staff, state their purpose, request permission to order, thank the staff for existing, then place the order using specific phrasing. He'd written it all down on a note card he pulled from his jacket. The card said things like, "I request the privilege of ordering," and "May I humbly suggest one coffee." I told him he could just say what he wanted. He insisted there must be a formal structure because his language exchange partner had told him Germans never just say "one coffee" without ceremonial framing. I asked who his exchange partner was. Turned out it was a guy from Wisconsin pretending to be German to sound more credible on a language app. The student ordered his coffee using the phrases from his card anyway, then sat there looking satisfied that he'd respected tradition, completely unaware he'd just recited nonsense. I work at a beer hall in Munich. An American tourist group arrived during Oktoberfest season and their tour guide had apparently taught them a formal beer ordering ceremony. Each person approached the bar individually, placed their right hand over their heart, made eye contact, and said, "Ich ehre das Bier," which means, "I honor the beer." Then they waited expectantly. I just stared at them. One guy asked if I was supposed to respond with the traditional phrase. I asked what phrase. He said the bartender is supposed to say, "Das Bier ehrt dich," meaning the beer honors you before pouring. I told him we don't do that and never have. He argued that authentic Bavarian beer culture absolutely requires the mutual honor exchange and that I must be new. I've worked there 11 years. He insisted I check with the owner. I am the owner. He left convinced I was lying to protect trade secrets or something. His entire group performed the ceremony at their table before drinking, creating a weird synchronized ritual that confused all the actual German customers. One of my regulars asked if it was some kind of American fraternity thing. I said probably. My cousin works at a bakery in Bremen. An American woman came in and handed the counter staff a printed sheet outlining what she called the German bakery protocol. It included steps like announcing yourself upon entry, waiting for acknowledgement, describing your baking needs in detail, and thanking staff for their craft before receiving items. She said she'd found this in a cultural immersion guidebook written specifically for Americans visiting Germany. The book was self-published by someone who'd never left Ohio. The woman followed every step on her sheet, including a part where she was supposed to compliment the smell of the bread before pointing to items. My cousin told her she could just point to what she wanted. She said that was disrespectful to German baking traditions. She insisted on reading a short paragraph about her appreciation for European craftsmanship. My cousin just stood there. After the woman finished her speech, she waited for the traditional baker's blessing. My cousin asked what that was. The woman said German bakers are supposed to touch the bread 3 times and say a phrase about grain. My cousin handed her a bag with her items. The woman looked disappointed and asked if younger Germans had stopped performing the traditions. My cousin said there were never traditions. The woman didn't believe her. I worked the ticket counter at a train station in Leipzig. An American businessman approached and placed both hands flat on the counter, closed his eyes for 3 seconds, then opened them and said, "Ich reise," which just means, "I travel." He explained this was the formal German announcement required before purchasing train ticket. I told him he could just tell me where he needed to go. He said that couldn't be right because formal German train travel culture requires passengers to ceremonially announce their intention to journey before logistics can be discussed. He'd learned this from a video series about European transportation etiquette. The video was made by someone with no European transportation experience. He insisted the announcement was mandatory and that I should write it down for other staff who might have forgotten. I told him we've never done that. He suggested maybe it was a regional thing and asked if Dresden or Berlin stations performed it differently. They don't. He eventually bought his ticket but kept muttering that something was off. Before boarding, he tried to find a conductor to perform what he called the passenger certification ceremony. That also doesn't exist. He missed his train while searching for imaginary protocols. My brother drives a tour bus in Rothenburg. An American couple on his tour kept asking why he wasn't following the formal German driving ceremony procedures. He asked what they meant. They said German tour bus drivers are supposed to announce each turn before making it and thank the passengers for their patience after each stop. My brother said that's just being polite sometimes, but it's not required. They insisted it was mandatory formal protocol because they'd read it in a traveler's forum where someone described their German bus tour. The forum post was from someone who'd confused tour guide narration with invented ceremony. The couple spent the entire tour critiquing my brother's lack of ritual compliance. When they got to Rothenburg, they asked if the formal town entry greeting would happen at the gate. My brother said the town doesn't have an entry greeting. They said every traditional German town performs a verbal acknowledgement of visitors at historical gates. My brother explained those are just old gates. They don't have ceremonies. The couple took photos of the gates anyway, waiting for something to happen. Nothing happened. They later wrote that the tour was incomplete because formal protocols had been skipped. My brother's company received a complaint asking why traditional German practices weren't honored. The practices don't exist. I manage a bike rental shop in Freiburg. An American university student rented a bike and asked for the formal safety blessing. I asked what that was. She said German bike rental culture requires staff to place their hand on the bike's handlebars and recite a phrase about safe travels and respecting traffic laws. I told her we just give people bikes and helmets. She said her study abroad orientation specifically covered this and that it was important German tradition. I asked who ran her orientation. She said a graduate student who'd been to Germany twice. The graduate student had apparently invented an entire cultural framework based on misunderstanding a casual ride safely comment. The student insisted on finding someone to perform the blessing, even offering to pay extra. I told her it didn't exist. She said that was impossible because her program wouldn't teach incorrect information. She eventually took the bike without the blessing but came back an hour later asking if she could retroactively receive it. I told her no because there's nothing to receive. She spent the next week asking other shops if they performed the ceremony. None did. She concluded Freiburg must be less traditional than other German cities. It's not. The ceremony was never real. My sister works at a language school in Bonn. An American student in the advanced German class insisted on beginning each sentence with a formal acknowledgement phrase he'd created. He'd say things like, "Ich spreche jetzt mit Respekt," meaning, "I now speak with respect," before every comment. He said this was mandatory in formal German conversation to show you're not being casual or disrespectful. My sister told him Germans don't do that. He argued that his previous teacher had emphasized the importance of formal speaking protocols. My sister asked who that teacher was. Turned out it was an online course taught by someone who spoke German as a third language and had mixed it up with another language's customs. The student had paid $800 for the course. He refused to believe it was wrong because of the cost. He continued using his phrase, and it made every conversation incredibly awkward. Other German students started avoiding him because every interaction took twice as long. He interpreted this as him being too formal for casual students and doubled down, adding more ceremonial phrases. By the end of the semester, he was speaking in what he believed was high formal German but was actually just him announcing he was about to speak before speaking. My sister eventually had to explain that he was making up his own dialect. He left believing German formal culture was dying out and that he was one of the last people keeping it alive. I work security at a government building in Bonn. An American consultant hired for a municipal project showed up on his first day and stood in the lobby performing what he called the building entry honor sequence. He faced the door, bowed, turned to face the interior, placed his hand over his heart, and said, "Ich betrete mit Respekt," which means, "I enter with respect." Then he stood still for 30 seconds. I walked over and asked if he was okay. He said he was completing the mandatory German formal building entry protocol required for government spaces. I told him to just walk in. He said that couldn't be correct because German civic culture demands ceremonial acknowledgement of public buildings. He'd learned this from a consultant training program that cost his company $14,000. The program was run by someone who'd never worked in Germany. I watched him perform this ritual every single morning for 2 weeks before his supervisor told him to stop because it was making German staff uncomfortable. He seemed genuinely sad to abandon what he thought was authentic cultural respect. On his last day, he asked if he could perform the ceremony one final time as a personal gesture. I told him nobody would stop him, but nobody would understand it either. He did it anyway. He left Germany convinced we'd forgotten our own traditions. The handshake remains the standard greeting. Everything else people imagine exists probably came from someone who spent 3 days in Frankfurt and wrote a blog.